For way too long, the story of an entire continent was told by outsiders. And that story, well, it was incomplete, and often it was just intentionally wrong. So today, we're going to dive into a massive international effort to set the record straight and uncover the real, deep history of Africa. You've probably heard this phrase thrown around, right? The Dark Continent. It was a label designed to stick, painting this picture of a place shrouded in mystery and totally untouched by progress. It was a powerful and deeply misleading brand.
And that idea came with an even more damaging one, that Africa was a land of people without a history. Can you believe that? You had European observers who would describe these amazing ceremonies and customs, but then just slap on dismissive labels like barbarous or primitive. The assumption underneath it all was simple and just devastating. If there's no written history, there's no history at all.
But is that the real story? I mean, really? A continent that is the literal cradle of humanity. Was it just a historical blank slate until outsiders arrived? Okay, let's get into this.
The answer to that is a huge, resounding no. And the proof? It comes from one of the most ambitious historical projects ever undertaken, UNESCO's General History of Africa.
And the authors of this project, they did not pull any punches. They described those previous accounts as being filled with, and I quote, mirages and fantasies. Think about that. The mission here wasn't just to add some new facts. It was to completely dismantle the old fictions that had been presented as science for far too long. And you gotta understand, this was a massive undertaking. We're talking scholars from all over the world, many from Africa itself, collaborating in the service of universal truth. Their goal was to reverse a core practice of colonialism, the deliberate erasure of local traditions just to impose foreign ones. This was nothing short of an act of reclamation. So, to tell a new, true history, the authors first had to tear down one of the biggest myths of all, the whole concept of race as a biological reality. Now, the scientific term for how human groups develop different physical traits is ratiation. Notice the word there. It's a process, not a fixed category. It's all about how populations change over time because of specific pressures and circumstances. So, what actually drives this process? Well, it pretty much boils down to two main forces. You've got genetic drift, which is the random shuffling of genes in small populations, and then there's natural selection, where traits that help a group survive in a particular environment get passed on. These two factors, not some rigid, made-up racial categories, are what truly explain the beautiful diversity of the human family. And this brings us to the crucial point, backed by a whole conference of international experts. Race is a social myth. It's a concept invented by societies, not a reality that we find in our DNA. In fact, get this, the genetic variation between so-called races is often smaller than the variation you can find within a single one of those groups.
And this myth? Oh, it had a purpose. You had these totally invented terms like Hamite, often based on a really warped reading of religious texts that were used to create false hierarchies, suggesting some Black peoples were superior to others. It was a classic divide-and-conquer tactic, all to serve colonial interests, and it's been completely rejected by modern science.
Okay, so if we throw out the old myths, how do we find the real story? Well, that's the exciting part. Historians now use an incredible array of sources to piece together Africa's deep, deep past. You know, history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it's literally carved in stone. Prehistoric art, like these incredible engravings, is a vital historical record. These aren't just decorations, they are windows into the past, showing us how people lived, what they valued, and the world they inhabited thousands of years before the first European accounts ever arrived. And then there's oral tradition. And let's be clear, this isn't just telling campfire stories. As this quote from a traditional historian shows, it was a formal, rigorous process. Griots and elders were basically living libraries, passing down history from generation to generation with witnesses there to ensure accuracy. In many African traditions, everything is history, from the story of the stars to the story of the plants. And we're even using particle physics to uncover ancient secrets. I'm not kidding. Scientists can now use cosmic rays, these tiny particles from space, to scan huge structures like the Great Pyramids. By tracking how these particles pass through the stone, they can find hidden chambers without moving a single block. It's basically like giving the pyramid a high-tech X-ray. So when you put all these different pieces together, a completely new picture starts to emerge, one that places Africa right at the center of the entire human story.
The scale of this history is just staggering. The human story in Africa stretches back millions of years, from some of the earliest hominids all the way to the first toolmakers. For almost all of human existence, Africa was the principal scene of our development. That period of exploitation and subjugation is, in the grand scheme of things, a very recent and tragic chapter.
And the very bodies of the people tell a story of sophisticated adaptation. Melanin protects against the sun. Frizzy hair protects the scalp from heat. Even the evolution of walking upright may have been an adaptation to see over the tall grasses of the East African savannas. These are features of resilience, developed over millennia. And you can see this interaction reflected in ancient art. This, for example, is from an Egyptian tomb. It doesn't show primitive people. It shows Black Africans as respected figures, participants in the grand history of the ancient world, bringing tribute and engaging with one of the world's great powers. This is a story of agency and interaction, not isolation. So, what does this all mean? Well, the UNESCO project proved that Africa's history isn't some separate, lesser story. It is the deep, foundational story of all of us. And if Africa is the homeland of humanity, then that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Isn't its history our shared heritage?